The smell of Vivian's signature lavender perfume hit me before I saw the pristine white boxes lined up on her mahogany dining table. 7 iPhone boxes, each tied with a silver ribbon that caught the light from the crystal chandelier above. My daughter Emma's eyes sparkled as she counted them, her small fingers tracing invisible lines in the air, connecting each box to its intended recipient. 1 for cousin Jake, 1 for Lily, 1 for Mason. Her voice faltered as she reached the end, the arithmetic crushing her 11-year-old optimism. 7 boxes, 8 grandchildren. The Montgomery estate in Greenwich had never felt colder than it did that Christmas Eve, despite the roaring fireplace that cast dancing shadows across the family portraits lining the walls. I watched my mother-in-law orchestrate her cruel theater with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony of exclusion. She'd positioned herself at the head of the table, her pearl necklace catching the light, as she gestured for the family to gather around. "Children, come collect your special gifts," Vivian announced, her voice honeyed with false warmth. The other grandchildren rushed forward, their parents, my brothers-in-law, and their wives, smiling with the satisfaction of belonging. David, my husband, stood beside his mother, his silence already telling me everything I needed to know about whose side he'd chosen. One by one, the children tore through silver ribbons and lifted the lids to reveal the latest iPhone 15 Pro Max, their squeals of delight piercing through the classical music, playing softly from hidden speakers. Emma stood beside me, her hand finding mine, squeezing with a maturity that broke my heart. She was preparing herself for what came next. "Emma, dear," Vivian finally acknowledged my daughter, her tone shifting to something that masqueraded as sympathy, but reeked of condescension. "You understand, don't you? These are for the blood grandchildren only. It's not personal, sweetheart. It's just tradition." The word tradition hung in the air like a blade. I felt Emma's whole body stiffen beside me, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She'd learned in her short life that tears were weapons others could use against you. The music box on the mantel, that antique Vivian always boasted about, supposedly passed down through 5 generations of Montgomery women, began playing its tinny version of Clair de Lune, as if cued by some cosmic cruelty. David finally spoke, but not in defense of his daughter. "Emma, Mom's just trying to maintain family customs. You need to manage your expectations." The words fell from his mouth like stones, each one landing heavily in the space between us. His brothers, Charles and William, exchanged glances with their wives, Margaret and Sarah, who suddenly found their manicures fascinating. "It's okay, Mama," Emma whispered, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hand. "I don't need their gifts." But I knew it wasn't about the phone. It had never been about material things. It was about belonging, about being seen as equal, about not having to earn love that should be freely given. The rage that built inside me was unlike anything I'd felt before. Not hot and explosive, but cold and calculated, refined by years of being dismissed as the daughter-in-law from the wrong side of Detroit. As I helped Emma with her coat, steadying my breathing to keep my hands from shaking, I noticed something the Montgomerys had forgotten in their arrogance. The security cameras they'd installed last month after a string of break-ins in Greenwich. I'd helped set them up, syncing them to the family phones for remote monitoring. They were still linked to my phone, recording everything in pristine 4K resolution. Every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, Vivian's pronouncement about blood and tradition. All of it captured and stored in the cloud. They had no idea that the nobody they'd dismissed for 15 years had been quietly building something they could never imagine. As we walked to the car, Emma's tears finally falling in the safety of darkness, I made a decision. The Montgomerys thought they understood power, legacy, and family. They were about to learn they understood nothing at all. That night, after Emma had cried herself to sleep, clutching the stuffed rabbit I'd given her when the adoption was finalized, I sat in our kitchen, staring at my laptop screen. The security footage played on loop, Vivian's face so pleased with her cruelty, David's cowardice, the other family members' complicity. But what struck me most was Emma's dignity in that moment. How she'd held herself like royalty, even as they tried to mark her as less than. I hadn't always been Susan Montgomery. Before the charity gala where David had swept me off my feet, with promises of forever, I was Susan Park, foster kid number 48,293 in the Michigan system. No baby pictures decorated my childhood, no family heirlooms passed down through generations. Just a plastic bag of belongings that traveled with me through 17 different homes, and a full scholarship to NYU that I'd earned by studying under streetlights when the foster homes got too chaotic. The prenuptial agreement Vivian had insisted on still sat in our safe, 30 pages of legal documentation designed to remind me of my place. I'd signed it without argument, knowing that fighting would only confirm their suspicions that I was after the Montgomery money. There was a clause about biological children receiving preferential treatment in inheritance matters, something I'd overlooked in my naive belief that love would conquer legal documents. David had been different once. The night we met, he'd spent 3 hours listening to my stories about pro bono work, about defending families who couldn't afford justice. "You're going to change the world," he'd said, his eyes bright with admiration. Now those same eyes couldn't even meet mine when his mother humiliated our daughter. The fertility struggles had started the transformation. 3 years of hormone injections that left me bloated and emotional. 4 rounds of IVF that drained our savings and my hope. Vivian's suggestions that David could still have biological children with someone else had been delivered over tea, as casually as discussing the weather. His silence in response had been the first crack in our foundation. Finding Emma had felt like destiny, a 2-year-old in the foster system, abandoned at a fire station with a note that said, "Please love her better than I can." The moment they placed her in my arms, her dark eyes, so like mine had been in the few childhood photos I possessed, studied me with ancient wisdom. "Mama?" she'd asked, and I'd whispered yes through tears. David had been thrilled at first, parading Emma at country club events, posting photos on social media. But as Vivian's disapproval grew more pronounced, his enthusiasm waned. The other wives, Margaret and Sarah, had mastered the art of backhanded sympathy. "How wonderful that you're giving back," they'd say, as if Emma was a charity project rather than my heart walking outside my body. What none of them knew was that while they'd been dismissing me as David's unsuccessful wife, I'd quietly made senior partner at Whitman, Klein & Associates. My specialty, estate law and corporate acquisitions, had made me one of the most sought-after attorneys in Manhattan. I'd kept my success quiet, letting them believe I still did little nonprofit things, because I'd learned that being underestimated was its own form of power. 6 months ago, I discovered Vivian had restructured the grandchildren's trust funds. A forensic accountant friend had shown me the paperwork during a casual lunch. Each biological grandchild would receive $2 million at 21. Emma's name appeared nowhere in the documentation. The exclusion was surgical, deliberate, and perfectly legal. David's financial dependence on his mother was absolute. He'd never worked outside the family business, never earned a dollar that didn't come from Montgomery Industries. His sister Catherine had been cut off completely 5 years ago for marrying a public school teacher. She lived in Seattle now, exiled for the crime of choosing love over money. That night, as I stood in Emma's doorway, watching her sleep, I studied the family tree project she'd made for school. She'd drawn herself on the Montgomery branch with such careful detail, coloring each leaf with precision, writing her name in perfect cursive. The hope in that simple drawing was almost unbearable. I traced my finger over her name, and for the first time in 15 years, I stopped trying to earn a place at their table. It was time to build my own. December 26th arrived gray and quiet, the world nursing its Christmas hangover. While the Montgomerys slept off champagne and self-satisfaction, I drove through empty streets to my office in the financial district. The building was a ghost town except for security, perfect for what I needed to do. My keycard chirped against the reader, and I made my way to the 42nd floor where my real life existed. The nameplate on my door read S. Park Senior Partner. I'd never taken David's name professionally, a small rebellion that had gone unnoticed. The city spread below my window like a promise, buildings reaching toward clouds that threatened snow. I pulled up Montgomery Industries corporate filings, my fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. What I found made me lean back in my leather chair, a smile playing at my lips for the first time since Christmas Eve. Vivian Montgomery, the grande dame of Greenwich society, was drowning. The company was hemorrhaging money like a severed artery. Bad cryptocurrency investments had cost them $12 million. Over-leveraged real estate deals in Miami were underwater, literally and figuratively, thanks to climate change. But the crown jewel was a lawsuit from their former CFO, alleging wrongful termination and discrimination. The discovery phase alone would cost millions. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Chen, my law school roommate, who now ran a venture capital firm in San Francisco. Heard about Christmas? Vivian's a bitch? How can I help? Jennifer had been there through everything. The fertility treatments, the adoption, the slow erosion of my marriage. She was also the only person who knew exactly how much I was worth. I called her immediately. How would you like to be the face of Jow International's East Coast expansion? Jennifer laughed, the sound bright against my exhaustion. Jow International doesn't have an East Coast expansion. They do now, I said, watching snow begin to fall. I need you to be someone else for a few months. Someone interested in acquiring a failing company with a sterling reputation. Montgomery Industries. Her voice sharpened with interest. Susan, what are you planning? I explained quickly, efficiently, the plan forming as I spoke. Jennifer would approach the Montgomerys as a representative of Jow International, one of our firm's biggest clients who actually had been considering expansion. She'd dangle salvation just out of reach with conditions that seemed reasonable but would systematically strip away Vivian's power. The Montgomerys would never suspect the nobody daughter-in-law, Jennifer mused. They don't even know what you do for a living, do they? They think I'm still doing pro bono work, I confirmed. David hasn't asked about my job in 3 years. That afternoon, Jennifer flew in from San Francisco. We sat in my living room while Emma was at her friend's house. Documents spread across the coffee table like battle plans. The real Zhao international executives, whom I'd saved from a hostile takeover 2 years prior, were happy to let us use their name. They owed me that much and more. New Year's brunch at the country club was my opening move. I arrived in the same modest dress I always wore, the one that made Margaret whisper about poor Susan's circumstances. Emma stayed home with a babysitter, refusing to go where she wasn't wanted. A decision that broke my heart but made me proud. Such a shame about Montgomery Industries, I mentioned casually over mimosas, watching Vivian's spine straighten across the room. We're handling some acquisition paperwork at the firm. Zhao International, I think? They're looking at distressed assets. Charles, the CFO, and David's older brother, nearly choked on his eggs Benedict. Zhao International. Oh, it's probably nothing, I said, returning to my fruit salad with practiced disinterest. You know how these rumors fly. Something about them wanting a legacy brand to establish East Coast credibility. The desperation that flickered across their faces was carefully catalogued. Vivian abandoned her conversation with the club president to glide over, her smile tight. Susan, dear, how interesting. You must tell us more about your little job. There's not much to tell, I demurred. Though the partner handling it mentioned something about the acquisition lead being very particular about family values. Jennifer Chen, I think her name was. She's apparently passionate about inclusive families, something about losing her sister to the foster system. That night, my phone exploded with texts from Charles, David, and even William. The family that hadn't included me in a group chat in 15 years suddenly needed my expertise. The chess pieces were moving exactly as I'd anticipated, but what they didn't know was that Jennifer Chen was already in my living room, practicing her role with the dedication of a method actor. Sunday dinner at the Montgomery estate the following week was unprecedented in its warmth. Vivian actually embraced Emma when we arrived, her thin arms wrapping around my daughter's shoulders, like wire around a precious package she'd just realized had value. A place had been set for Emma at the children's table. The good china, not the everyday plates they'd used before. Emma, darling, Vivian cooed, loud enough for everyone to hear. Tell us about school. You're doing so well, aren't you? The performance was Oscar-worthy, if you didn't know the actress. I played my part perfectly, the grateful daughter-in-law, finally receiving crumbs of acceptance. Throughout dinner, I dropped carefully constructed intelligence about Jennifer Chen. She only works with companies that share her values, I mentioned while passing the potatoes. Apparently, she turned down a $50 million deal last year because the CEO made a comment about adopted children not being real family. The way Vivian's hand tightened on her wineglass was poetry. After dinner, while the children played in the conservatory, Margaret cornered me by the powder room. David's sister-in-law had always been the sharpest knife in the drawer. Her Harvard MBA actually used rather than just framed. Since when do you know venture capitalists? Her eyes narrowed, studying me like a spreadsheet that didn't balance. Your little nonprofit doesn't exactly run in those circles, Susan. My heart hammered, but my face remained placid. NYU alumni event last month, I replied smoothly. Jennifer gave the keynote about ethical investing. We bonded over adoption advocacy. She's on the board of several foster care organizations. Margaret processed this, her fingers drumming against her Chanel clutch. And she just happened to mention Montgomery Industries? No, I said carefully. I mentioned David's family when she asked about my background. She seemed very interested in established family businesses, said they're more stable investments than tech startups. It was the perfect mix of truth and misdirection. Margaret would verify the alumni event. It had happened. Jennifer had spoken. She'd find Jennifer's name on foster care boards. We'd made sure of that 2 days ago with some strategic donations. For the first time in our marriage, David showed interest in my work on the drive home. This Jennifer Chen, he started, his hands tight on the steering wheel of his Porsche. How well do you know her? Well enough, I said, watching Emma in the back seat. Her headphones on, but her eyes alert. She's brilliant. Turned 3 failing companies into unicorns. Zhao International gave her carte blanche for acquisitions. Could you arrange a meeting? I pretended to consider. I could ask, but David, she's particular about who she works with. She'll want to see everything. Finances, family dynamics, company culture. Are you sure your mother would be comfortable with that level of scrutiny? His jaw clenched. We both knew Vivian Montgomery had never been scrutinized in her life. That evening, after Emma was asleep, I found her in the living room, winding up the music box I'd bought her last year, a cheap replica of Vivian's that played the same tune. Why is everyone being nice now? She asked, her voice small. The heartbreak of an 11-year-old recognizing conditional love nearly shattered my resolve. Sometimes people need the right motivation to show their true selves, I said carefully. But it's not real, she said, wise beyond her years. They don't actually love me. I pulled her close, smelling her strawberry shampoo. No, baby, but I do, and that's enough. Later that night, Jennifer and I refined the plan over encrypted video chat. She would meet them Wednesday, express interest, then gradually introduce conditions. Each requirement would seem reasonable: diversity initiatives, family-inclusive policies, financial transparency. Each would strip away another layer of Montgomery control. You sure you want to do this? Jennifer asked. Once we start, there's no going back. I thought about Emma at that Christmas dinner, standing with dignity while they tried to break her. About David's silence. About 15 years of being treated like an imposter in my own life. They drew first blood. I said, I'm just finishing the war. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. I know you're up to something. My heart raced, but my reply was steady. Just trying to help the family. The word family tasted like ash, but the game was far from over. The next morning, I sat on Emma's bedroom floor, surrounded by photos for her school heritage project. Each image told a story, but not the one the Montgomerys would want published in their social registry. There was Emma on adoption day, her tiny hand gripping my finger with fierce determination, trust absolute, despite the system that had already failed her 2 years into life. I found myself transported back to my own childhood, 17 foster homes blurring together like a watercolor painting left in the rain. The Johnsons who locked the refrigerator at night. 5, the Martins, who introduced me as their charity case at church. The Williamses, who returned me after 3 months because I was too difficult to love. Each rejection had carved away pieces of me until I learned to be invisible, to need nothing, to expect even less. The adoption photo triggered another memory, my last foster home, the day I turned 18. Mrs. Chen, no relation to Jennifer, had handed me a garbage bag of my belongings and a $20 bill. "Some kids just aren't meant for families," she'd said, not unkindly, just matter of fact. "But you're smart. You'll make your own way." The parallels between my past and Emma's present were razor sharp. Both of us marked as outsiders, both trying to earn love that should be freely given, both learning that family could be the cruelest word in the English language. I picked up our wedding album, dust motes dancing in the morning light as I opened it. There was David, young and passionate, his wedding speech captured in a photo where his mouth was open mid-word. I could still hear that speech. Family isn't about blood or names or traditions. It's about choosing each other every day, especially when it's hard. The man in that photo was a stranger now. The transformation had been gradual, like erosion, invisible day to day, but devastating over time. First, it was suggesting we skip Sunday dinners when his mother made comments. Then it was agreeing that private school might be too much adjustment for Emma. Finally, it was his silence on Christmas Eve, the ultimate betrayal, delivered not with words but with their absence. I found the journal from our IVF years, pages warped from tears. The hormone injections that made me gain 40 pounds, weight Vivian never let me forget. The retrievals that left me bedridden while she suggested David could explore other options. The negative tests, each one a small death. David's distance growing with each failure, as if my inability to produce a biological heir made me defective merchandise. Then came the miracle of Emma. The social worker had warned us she was difficult to place, too old, too traumatized, too many unknowns in her background. But when I held her that first time, she'd looked at me with eyes that held my entire future. "Mama," she'd whispered, and I'd known with bone-deep certainty that she was mine in every way that mattered. The memory that nearly broke me was from 2 years ago. Emma had won the school spelling bee, and we'd all attended the celebration. Vivian had introduced her to someone as David's adopted daughter, not even granting me the connection. Emma had corrected her. "I'm Susan's daughter, too." Vivian had laughed, that tinkling sound like breaking glass. "Of course, dear, though Susan isn't really a Montgomery, is she?" My phone rang, pulling me from the past. It was Jennifer, calling from her hotel. "I've been researching Montgomery Industries all night. Susan, it's worse than you thought. Vivian's been embezzling from the grandchildren's trust funds for years." "What?" I stood so quickly the photo albums scattered. "She's been replacing real investments with IOUs, using the money to maintain her lifestyle. The houses, the cars, the country club membership. It's all funded by stealing from her own grandchildren." The irony was delicious. The woman who'd excluded Emma from those very trust funds had been robbing them blind. "There's more," Jennifer continued. "That music box she's always going on about? I found the original sale record. She sold it to a private collector in 2019 for $300,000. The one on her mantle is a $50 replica from eBay." I actually laughed, the sound surprising me. The symbol of Montgomery legacy, the heirloom that represented generations of family superiority, was as fake as their values. That evening, Emma sat beside me as I tucked her in. She was holding the report card that had arrived that day, straight A's plus a note from her teacher. Emma demonstrates remarkable resilience and emotional intelligence. She's a natural leader who lifts up her classmates. "Mom," she said quietly, "I know you're planning something." I stroked her hair, choosing my words carefully. "What makes you think that?" "You're different, stronger, like you've remembered who you are." She looked at me with those wise eyes. "Whatever it is, I trust you." That night, I stood in her doorway, watching her sleep, her face peaceful in the glow of her nightlight. The Montgomerys had tried to dim her light, to make her small and grateful for scraps. They had no idea they'd awakened something primal in me. Not just a mother's rage, but a survivor's cunning. I touched the simple gold band on my finger, so different from the elaborate diamonds the other Montgomery wives wore. But I'd earned my ring, my place, my family through fire and determination. The Montgomerys were about to learn that the foster kid they'd dismissed had become something they never saw coming. Their reckoning. Wednesday arrived wrapped in Manhattan fog, the kind that made the city feel like a secret. Jennifer's performance at Montgomery Industries headquarters was masterful. She walked into their boardroom wearing understated elegance, a $10,000 suit that whispered rather than shouted, and surveyed the room like a queen considering purchasing a small kingdom. "Mr. Montgomery, Mrs. Montgomery," she nodded to Charles and Vivian, deliberately not using first names. "I appreciate you making time. Zhao International doesn't typically consider distressed assets, but your company has potential." The way she said potential made it sound like she was being generous. The Montgomerys had assembled their full court, Charles as CEO, Vivian as chairman of the board, William as operations director, even David as communications director, a title as empty as his contribution. They'd prepared a presentation that glossed over their failures and highlighted their family values. Jennifer let them finish, then pulled out her own tablet. "Shall we discuss the real numbers? The 12 million lost in cryptocurrency? The Miami properties that are quite literally underwater? The discrimination lawsuit that could cost you everything?" The color drained from Vivian's face. They'd thought their finances were private. Jennifer let the silence stretch before continuing. "Zhao International only partners with companies that share our values. Family inclusivity is non-negotiable." She looked directly at Vivian. "We need to see how you treat all family members, especially adopted children. It's part of our corporate responsibility mandate." "Of course," Vivian said quickly. "We're very inclusive. Why, just last week—" "Actions, not words," Jennifer interrupted. "I'll need to see trust fund documentation for all grandchildren, family inclusion policies, and recent family events." That evening, Margaret cornered me again, this time at school pickup. Jennifer Chen doesn't exist in any Zhao International directory. I checked. My blood turned to ice, but I'd prepared for this. "You're right," I said calmly. "She goes by her married name professionally, Chen Williams. Jennifer Williams is listed." Margaret pulled out her phone immediately, searching. Her eyes widened when she found Jennifer Williams, Zhao International's Director of Acquisitions. What she didn't know was that Jennifer Williams was Jennifer's wife, and they'd legally hyphenated their names just 2 days ago. The beauty of truth adjacent to lies. "There's something else," Margaret said, her voice lower. Charles has been moving money, large amounts. He's panicking about something. That night, David came home late, scotch already on his breath. "Your friend is going to destroy us," he said without preamble. "My friend is trying to save your family's company," I countered, folding laundry with deliberate calm. "She wants to see everything. Mom had to admit Emma has a trust fund now. Had to add her photos to the office wall. Do you know how humiliating that was?" I turned to face him fully. "Humiliating? Like Christmas Eve wasn't humiliating for our daughter?" "That's different." "How?" The word came out sharp enough to cut. "Explain to me how excluding an 11-year-old girl is different from being asked to include her." He couldn't, so he retreated to his study with another scotch. Friday brought an unexpected development. Vivian announced she was throwing Emma a belated 12th birthday party. Emma's actual birthday was in March, but Vivian insisted on celebrating early to show our family unity. The hypocrisy was staggering, but I played along. "How wonderful," I said when she called. "Emma will be thrilled." "I want to do it properly," Vivian said, her voice strained. "The music box ceremony and everything. It's tradition for Montgomery grandchildren." The music box ceremony, something she'd never mentioned before, because Emma had never been considered a real grandchild. I suggested we film it for posterity. She loved the idea. That night, Jennifer and I reviewed Montgomery Industries' complete financials, provided reluctantly by Charles. It was a masterpiece of fraud. Not just embezzlement, but tax evasion, securities fraud, and money laundering. Charles had been cooking books for years with Vivian's full knowledge. "This is enough to send them both to prison," Jennifer said quietly. "I don't want prison," I said. "I want justice. There's a difference." My phone buzzed with an email from an unknown address. "I know who you really are." No signature, no details. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Jennifer traced the IP address. It came from Montgomery Industries. Someone there was onto me, but who? And more importantly, what did they want? The anonymous emailer revealed herself within hours. My phone rang at midnight, the caller ID showing a Seattle area code. Catherine Montgomery's voice was honey and venom. "Hello, Susan. We need to talk about dear mother." David's exiled sister, the one who'd been erased from family photos and trust funds for marrying beneath her station. I'd always wondered what had really happened to her. "I've been monitoring the company emails," Catherine continued. "Did you know that when you're technically still a board member, they forget to revoke your access? I've been watching Mother destroy everything for 5 years, waiting for someone brave enough to stop her." "What do you want?" I asked carefully. "What you want, justice. Mother didn't just cut me off financially. She destroyed my husband's teaching career with false accusations, had us blacklisted from every private school on the East Coast. We had to flee to Seattle to start over. She sent me a secure file that night. Screenshots, documents, recordings. 5 years of evidence that Vivian had been stealing from everyone, including her own sons. The children's trust funds were just the beginning. She'd mortgaged properties that were supposed to be held in trust, sold off company assets and pocketed the profits, even taken loans against her grandchildren's future inheritances. "The birthday party," Catherine said before hanging up. "Make sure everything is recorded. Mother always shows her true self when she thinks she's winning." Saturday morning, Emma's surprise party was Vivian's greatest performance. Ice sculptures shaped like swans, a string quartet playing Disney princess themes, and synchronized iPads for all the grandchildren, including Emma. The society photographer from Greenwich Lifestyle magazine captured every moment exactly as I'd arranged when I'd anonymously tipped them off about the heartwarming family celebration. The music box ceremony was the centerpiece. Vivian wound up the antique, or rather the fake, and its tinny melody filled the conservatory. "This music box," she announced to the assembled guests, "represents our family legacy. Today, we officially welcome Emma into that legacy." Emma stood beside me in her party dress, every inch the princess they'd tried to convince her she wasn't. Her face was composed, but I saw the confusion in her eyes. She knew this was performance, not truth. David, drunk on champagne and desperate for the Jow deal to close, gave an impromptu toast that I recorded on my phone. "Adoption is the purest form of love," he declared, raising his glass. "It's choosing to be family. Emma isn't just my daughter. She's the best thing that ever happened to our family." The crowd applauded. Vivian smiled. The photographer captured it all. But children tell the truth when adults perform. David's nephew Jake, emboldened by sugar and spite, whispered to Emma when he thought no one was listening, "You're still not real family. Grandmother only invited you because of the money people." Emma's eyes met mine across the room. I nodded slightly. "Soon, my darling, soon." That evening, I suggested to Vivian that Jennifer should attend the final negotiation at the house rather than the office. "More personal," I said. "Show her the family side of Montgomery Industries, the music box, the portraits, the legacy." "Brilliant," Vivian agreed, already planning her staging. "We'll show her what real family means." The irony was lost on her. Jennifer and I spent Sunday night preparing the final contracts. The terms were elegant in their devastation. Jow would acquire Montgomery Industries, saving it from bankruptcy. In return, Vivian would step down immediately. Any family member found guilty of financial crimes would forfeit their shares to a trust for all grandchildren, equally distributed, with double shares for adopted children to compensate for historical discrimination. "She'll never sign it," Jennifer said. "She will," I assured her. "When the alternative is prison and poverty, she'll sign anything." Monday morning arrived crisp and bright, one of those New York days that made everything feel possible. I dressed Emma in her school uniform, braiding her hair the way she liked it. "Mom," she said as I tied the ribbon, "why did they change?" "People show their true selves when they want something badly enough," I told her. "Tomorrow we'll see who they really are." That night, I placed cameras throughout the meeting room, completely legal, as I was still technically a resident of the house David owned. Every angle was covered, every word would be captured. I sent a single text to Jennifer, "Curtain rises at 10 a.m. Her reply was immediate, ready for the finale. The storm was hours away, and the Montgomerys were still arranging deck chairs, convinced they were about to save their empire. They had no idea they were about to lose everything they'd never truly valued. 10 o'clock Tuesday morning arrived with surgical precision. Jennifer walked into the Montgomery estate with an entourage that would make royalty envious, 3 lawyers, 2 accountants, and on the conference room screen, Catherine's face materializing from Seattle like a ghost of Christmas past. Vivian's perfectly composed face cracked for just a moment before she recovered. "Catherine, how unexpected." "Hello, Mother," Catherine said coolly. I'm here as a consultant for Zhao International. My expertise in toxic family dynamics is apparently quite valuable. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Charles started to protest, but Jennifer raised a manicured hand. Shall we discuss why we're really here? She opened her laptop, and Montgomery Industries' true financial state appeared on the screen in devastating detail. Embezzlement, securities fraud, tax evasion spanning 15 years. Each word was a nail in a coffin Vivian didn't yet realize she was lying in. These are baseless accusations, Vivian started. Are they? Jennifer clicked to the next slide, the trust fund statements. $15 million missing from your grandchildren's trusts, replaced with IOUs that aren't worth the paper they're printed on. Charles went pale. William started to stand, but his wife Sarah pulled him back down. David stared at his mother like he was seeing her for the first time. You stole from your own grandchildren. David's voice was barely a whisper. I was protecting the family legacy, Vivian said, her composure finally cracking. Those investments were risky. I moved the money to safer vehicles. You moved it to your personal accounts, Jennifer interrupted, showing the transaction records. To pay for this house, your cars, your lifestyle, you've been robbing your grandchildren to maintain an illusion. The music box on the mantel seemed to mock them all, its presence a reminder of everything fake about the Montgomery legacy. Speaking of illusions, Catherine added from the screen, should we discuss the music box, Mother? The one you sold in 2019 for $300,000? That replica cost $50 on eBay. I have the receipt. The sound Vivian made wasn't quite human. Part gasp, part rage, part defeat. David turned to me, the pieces finally clicking. You knew, you orchestrated all of this. I stood slowly, pulling out my phone. I tried to warn you at Christmas. The video began playing on the conference room screen, Vivian declaring Emma wasn't blood family, David's silence, the laughter of the others. When you excluded my daughter, when you let your mother hurt her, you chose your side. The Society Photographer's livestream appeared on Jennifer's laptop, thousands of viewers watching the Montgomery empire crumble in real time. Every word we were saying was being broadcast to Greenwich society. But the birthday party, Vivian sputtered. Performance, I said simply, just like everything else about your family. But you gave quite a speech about family legacy and inclusion. The photographer live-streamed that too. Jennifer pulled up the final contract. Zhao International will acquire Montgomery Industries under these conditions. Vivian steps down immediately. All embezzled funds are returned with interest. Emma receives double the trust amount as compensation for discrimination, and Susan becomes the family liaison to Zhao. This is extortion, Charles said weakly. No, Jennifer smiled. This is business. The alternative is federal prosecution. I believe the sentence for embezzling $15 million is about 20 years. Vivian aged a decade in 30 seconds. Her empire, built on lies and theft, was crumbling. But I wasn't done. There's one more thing, I said, walking to the music box. David, you should know that while you were ignoring your wife's career, she became senior partner at Whitman, Klein & Associates. My net worth is approximately 8 times your family's, was anyway, before your mother destroyed it. I wound up the music box, its tinny melody playing over the chaos. I never needed your money. I wanted your love. For Emma, that's all we ever wanted, to belong. Susan, wait. David reached for me, and for the first time in years I heard the man I'd married in his voice. But it was too late for waiting. Emma's real birthday gift, I announced to the room and the livestream audience, is never having to beg for a seat at your table again. Within 3 hours, Montgomery Matriarch Exposed was trending nationally. The Society Photographer's livestream had captured everything. Vivian's confession, the fraud revelation, the music box humiliation. Greenwich Lifestyle magazine ran a special digital edition with the headline, "The Fall of Connecticut's First Family." Vivian's country club membership was revoked before sunset, her parking spot already reassigned. The legal machinery moved with swift precision. Federal investigators arrived at Montgomery Industries that afternoon, seizing computers and files. Vivian was arrested at her home, the perp walk captured by news cameras that Jennifer had definitely not tipped off. The image of her in handcuffs, still wearing her pearls, became the thumbnail for every news story. Charles was arrested 2 days later, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. William, smarter or luckier, had already fled to Switzerland, where his wife Sarah had family. The Montgomery empire hadn't just crumbled. It had evaporated like morning dew under an unforgiving sun. David surprised me by showing up at our apartment that night with divorce papers. But not the ones I expected. He was filing against his family, legally separating himself from Montgomery Industries and all associated trusts. "I'm done with them," he said, looking exhausted, but somehow younger, like weight had been lifted. "I choose you and Emma, if you'll have me." I took the papers, studying them carefully. Once a lawyer, always a lawyer. "I'll think about it," I said, which was more than he deserved, but less than he hoped. Margaret and Sarah came by separately over the next week, both filing for divorce from the Montgomery brothers. "We knew," Sarah admitted over coffee in my kitchen. "We all knew Vivian was stealing, manipulating, destroying. We just didn't know how to stop her." "You could have stood up for Emma," I said quietly. "You're right," Margaret said, no excuses offered. "We were cowards. You were braver than all of us combined." Catherine flew in from Seattle for the legal proceedings. At the airport, she hugged me like a sister. "You did what I couldn't," she said. "You saved those kids from growing up like we did, thinking love was conditional, that family meant cruelty disguised as tradition. The court appointed me executor of the Grandchildren's trusts, a decision that made legal and poetic sense. Every child would receive equal amounts at 21, with Emma receiving additional damages for discrimination. But more importantly, I insisted on financial literacy education for all of them, starting immediately. "I don't want them to end up like their parents," I told the judge. "Money without wisdom is how we got here." Jake, David's nephew, who'd been so cruel to Emma, approached us at the courthouse. At 15, he was old enough to understand what his grandmother had stolen from all of them. Not just money, but innocence. "I'm sorry," he said to Emma, his voice cracking with adolescent emotion. "Grandmother taught us wrong. Family isn't about blood. It's about—" He struggled for words. "It's about choosing to love," Emma supplied gently. "Every day, even when it's hard." The kid burst into tears. David started therapy immediately, found his first real job at 42, entry-level marketing at a startup that had no idea who his family was. He showed up at Emma's school events, not performatively for society photographers, but quietly in the back row just to be there. "I was a coward," he told his therapist in a session he asked me to attend. I let my mother's voice become louder than my conscience. I failed my daughter and my wife. The therapist looked at me. Do you want to respond to that? I want him to tell Emma, I said. I'm not the one who needs to hear it. 6 months later, Vivian was sentenced to 5 years minimum security, with the possibility of parole in 3. She looked smaller in her prison jumpsuit, her carefully maintained facade stripped away. She'd written letters to all of us asking for forgiveness. Catherine burned hers. David threw his away unopened. I read mine to Emma, who listened thoughtfully before saying, "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means not letting their choices poison our future." 11 years old, and wiser than all of us. 1 year later, Christmas Eve arrived, dressed in snow and possibility. Our brownstone in Brooklyn, purchased with my own money, decorated with our own choices, glowed with warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace. The music box sat on our mantel, that cheap replica that had outlasted an empire built on lies. The doorbell rang at 6, and Emma ran to answer it. Catherine and her wife arrived first, arms full of homemade cookies and genuine laughter. Jennifer and her wife followed, still in their power suits, but softened by the kind of exhaustion that comes from good work well done. My foster siblings I'd reconnected with came next. Maria, who'd become a teacher. James, who'd fought his way to a nursing degree. Keisha, who'd aged out of the system like me, but never stopped believing in family. David arrived separately, still earning his way back, carrying a casserole he'd actually made himself, burned edges and all. "I followed the recipe," he said defensively, when Emma giggled. "Mostly." Even some of David's cousins came, the ones who'd been exiled over the years for various sins against Vivian's rigid standards. We were the misfit toys of the Montgomery dynasty, but we were choosing each other. No one brought iPhones or elaborate gifts. Emma had asked for donations to foster care organizations instead of presents. The pile of receipts from various charities grew throughout the evening, each one a small victory against the materialism that had poisoned the Montgomerys. After dinner, as we gathered in the living room, Emma stood up. "I want to read something," she announced, pulling out a folded paper. It was her essay that had won the state competition, "The Family We Choose." Her voice was clear and strong as she read about the difference between being born into something and choosing it, between inheritance and earned love, between tradition and intention. She wrote about me, about David's journey back, about Catherine's exile and return, about grandparents who weren't blood but who chose to love her anyway, my foster siblings who'd become her aunts and uncles. Family, she concluded, isn't a noun you're given, it's a verb you choose. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. David asked to speak next. "I need to say something to Emma," he said, his voice rough. "I failed you. I let voices that didn't matter drown out the only voice that should have, yours. I'm sorry. I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning the title of Dad, if you'll let me." Emma walked over and hugged him. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said, "but not a third." The room laughed through tears. As midnight approached, I wound up the music box one last time for the year. Its tinny melody of Claire de Lune filled our home. Not a mansion, not an estate, just a home full of people who'd chosen each other. "You know what I realized?" Emma said, sitting beside me as the last notes faded. This fake music box is more real than anything the Montgomerys had. Because we gave it meaning, we chose what it represents. Not inherited legacy, but created love. Jennifer raised her wine glass. To the family we choose. To the family we choose, we echoed. 5 years from this moment, Emma would give her valedictorian speech at her high school graduation. She'd thank the Montgomerys for teaching her, through their cruelty, that family is a verb, not a noun. Vivian, out on parole, would watch from the back row, finally understanding what she'd lost. She'd try to approach Emma afterward, but Emma would simply say, "I forgive you, but we're not family. Family is earned." David would be there in the front row, having earned his place through 5 years of consistent choosing, of showing up, of prioritizing love over legacy. He'd cry when Emma thanked him for teaching her that people can change if they're brave enough to do the work. But that was the future. That Christmas Eve, as snow began to fall again, I held my daughter close and watched our chosen family talk and laugh and exist in the space we'd created. The Montgomerys had given us one gift after all. They'd shown us exactly who we didn't want to be. And in that rejection, we'd found ourselves. The music box sat silent now, its purpose served. We'd entered this story as outcasts begging for scraps of belonging. We were leaving it as architects of our own destiny, builders of a family based on choice rather than chance, love rather than law. Emma was right. We were always enough. They just couldn't see it through their own emptiness. Their loss, our freedom. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt excluded, underestimated, or forced to prove your worth to people who should love you unconditionally, remember that the best revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's building something so beautiful with the pieces they broke that they realize what they lost. Follow Refined Revenge for more stories of elegant justice, where the underdogs don't just survive, they transcend. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show them exactly what they walked away from.